Shaw Pilatus the Kathleen as Juan Christian.
Kys thou, Ewan?
Oh, Tommy Castle for a mile.
Rows you sheest ag a foot and more a shaw.
Hey, let me on shen rush me do me right a treasure.
Banny me, wees you a catch favor? Nach cattle shoe de mai, raya. Good for January. Rows you ba moorad?
Hasem, the jow, clever me yellow arm. Foddy the knee and fashion the clay arm.
Folly the row.
My shen be.
Bramon a skedan on you.
Be, I skellen de lure on.
Wel emmer die beden om de voet nish.
Te flood moor on Palsje longus. Ach, kiel me drouw jiel moor jit. Te kan pak lessen en linten en raya.
Binnen is steer en veer terug, kerk en linten en ish. Kred de gal nish.
O, Tommy gol her is de kashiller er a veda gol mach. Velus on chit merm.
Te. Lig dun gal shees ges in beeld jan foot.
Wel vis ad der a bol shaw, Kathleen. Te en me sit en glasierish. Emma die kieten hai me on shen merish me shen kajen de rou. Beens de sees a kashen as Juan hall. As kiel me emma die skillen me kjon en nigen kwaast op a gol ek an istach.
Werk shen tre wat gist wat moei wij in sheden kudden je ken seel. Te me a klatschen immer die keten me heen, mich ulden a kiateken wat jentak. Roish me jahad gis ken seel.
O, wij kiateken de lua jentak. Son wat glenner as keur dee oer en beden, as hoggad en linten as tedden a wood, as renad en jabi kunli alu, as hoggad veel wat saltje ons a tobben, as linad en covered les brisket mare.
Roosje weesje bijat roos me degad in foot.
Ons na legen shen hoi en sagat shiskis en kjonji en pert, te keur banak den a bela.
Rou nummer 1 af gal shees de agen na dene shoulder soe.
O, pe, as wen ad keur kuna de han en bela as die en pert me gadan?
As nishuan, inch down inge en shen skillen tad.
O, forry geest, forry, as far be kunjak den ons a skiel weg.
Lig dun sai shees a stol on shid.
Maidalua. Nish on faster ons en saura de rou. Hai olun de bellen maakjes en grond eastie vai punne hintje. When a maas stop, bellen by sausten, nalben, neren, as me schaafs na hoog by an ellen. When Irish elen as een moer kune, tre hayad by an put, ach by bodulant trom as toe, gal tayag de eri soos by an hieras. Is de by al juna bellen en het kurden en lintenen, dirry en giedel tajamach, as by an tonnen en druggle dat habi. By an grain en gal de lai, en by an dachas en ei chitter. When in a steeren tayag de tan en linten en hock, as ryads on fast in the put, oyu a lemma on bella. Nish ons a bear the shaw, the shen, dunya, dunnel, and Mr. Juan Hall. As doot there is je kom regen ons a bella, like dun forry, der nie mad vachen en leib, brische, heris na krimpten. Ons a war, wen pavel like a put, vier imniach. Motion soutjes die in berde weg shaw, son dat vis op, trouw en berde vier shen, as a noon. Trebe moest jai oer a klein, so bar, as a row schiller a beige in berde weg shaw de be fastnet, high and long son so well may maak. De hera, kren oer na velly en rost en rischen put. High ad lesson jas, in here, as leuk schengen ze doei, as hoera de milje vai kjon gerbi. Doet June row, ten Irish roos darmach son oog de wie wach or shaw, Jew. Beech ni share Jew de cost na vision put. Son Tommy Yanu de mai. Na yay. All had the codger. Dera Hank long beg bree hook. As go ad the east. As floppy ad. Isn't put.
Fy sien sgil fe fai.
Oh, ta nena ji skillenum. Wel skilje be at you hinnish party tarnish as ginsto skill veg magellan. So revel a yano ta fesam. Go to her, Tommy Clayton.
A treder fy sien dunje cyml ond dau tŵt lorge strwn. She's a chas Jen crink ons bella tjera enmus het grun mui. Nish vein dunje sjo vier doe kri. As we all maaiege de vergele gars er snig. San de denje vege de hit stach. As de feathen tje eke tjallik. As er an earlier affairishin vosh grun rushin. As earlier in tje me geet chaglam kudjak an sjo. A egan de gare san kush. Nish er darige. Vad sam gal she's de ker shilla en in gajan an skille mal. San fast against. As tre vad gal sha en saai eke shen dunje. Doet ver jou rishin ver. Ik dan giljak san in shen dunje de galmeren. San te dunje mai. As vier wij doen eigen vieren. As René ach tre hinken dunje maak doet rush. Ha jagen gal met. San en el kabelam. As te mi vagen de wel uma heke kabel moer is njat. Doet in uitverdish. Imi stjak is gauw in gamen jane greyad. San she fidere. As tre wij aan de janu shop. Wij een gamen chen deed ges kabel moer. As me shen hai in sheden dunje meru. Nish tre hinkad ges in bol en mus het glon kem. Red ges rum se. Ha jak ad me geet en musje kem. Apel jim ad her je bil jen glun. Vai unchou ges chouelle. Nish tre hannik in shen dunje. Kreeg ad an janu. Doe ma ye, kren lim veon. As chilirak we een kabel guit was, as wij veget na hei ons mene red, gamen. Son rauw na vers en son goil enne met chan ons verdeel. As wij een dunje veget de geil esch en gamen, is a hei ons glun mee.
Ta school maaiad. Ren me roe against toe en stil, me kjon en lei. Hai mi macht des een Easter, lees een dead jari.
Wanneer?
Oh, benny. Veron le, tamme pegger de hennen is. Hai mi macht des een Easter, wij perne hintje. Ons een derde brie weg de wij om. As we der gonja saus nog merm. Hai shin macht, as lesh in ad me hier. Dera henk shin gis een ool, te enmeset oog na kjodden. Teer en chow just jen kjodden rouwe. An shen chen de mi en bela mach by en tal. Zonder kastjelle me gummi ribben, gummi vatten, dat grey. Ach se trui jan de grey in gummach bij ach skoon naar de leesjen. Bij ach mosh kweg gummi, de paten, as on aston doemoeron. Nis tre hannek in genje saas nog in East Moor Shaw, renad elachte ad, as limmerach ad, soos stooljerre, en wij me veget de dellel les in East Moor melammergen. Nis leg Shaw, hai me saadje me hier, tis bol istach mach bij een trei het glun mei. As hannak mi wens de kersen, as sjat en slei, ons beda elle, as wat giestach. As ons een shen rad jene stieren, hai mi soos a gerade, as ren me gin braiach che. Wel you prowl on shen magolian. As drega e ve. Wel, manna istad doet me. Oh, tarilachom, dragari. Leg shen, shalami, tamil peg, asul. As doet me gissen, jorian ons en bere, meram. Kumach neramlach you. Zonder me schmunjak dan daarou eest ons paaltje met hier. Danny me ons tamil peg bij plok berach eka. Then Dunya fear begoil treer en itan kalag moes jackse bere. Is ik het tre show. Go me taste jen kon emsje moer ons neer. As then gie gold de chit bij een hier is. We shen jen me en bere de kostnek gissen put. As ons tamil peg bij tonnen de moer on. As ben mara brische as getlaf herach en tochig die en bede weg. As jiech me bij treed de gree, dagen me met sjen kere, as een kajen eke ons een bede ella janu de mai. O, wat janu de mai, son bij een shawl begori. Nee, ei, leg kostna gissen put. Dori me, dera, honak me, mekara, chits, jacks put. As tre bij gol sha, en me jen braich, jay. Als je ching de mara magolje. Oh, a suljat tuti, a suljat, tawa wa gwenta. Krijt als munit naar een skielberg jen is.
Aber schön skill für wij me gedden.
Te gedden aanmacht nisch, als ten kirach in aaster wel chitte. Te trede gol, wel je gedden 4 of zo. Lig doen gol, te trede kost na taai.
Die waans.
Iwai.
I was born at Callowscroft on Ballackill in Kinrade 66 years ago, and at that time the Manx language was spoken a good deal among the older people, but the younger people weren't much interested. There was no particular value to them in their work or their business, so they didn't make much use of it. In fact, they understood a bit, and others didn't have any. In fact, I never picked much up myself, although I was interested to a certain extent. But at that time, the people, the place was very much self-supporting. There were 6 fishing boats on the Lezayre shore, and others 1 or 2 on Derby, and the farmers produced practically everything they used, and herring fishing was in full swing. The Lezayre was a place of fishermen in those days. We followed the fishing up all around the year. They would go to the cod fishing at Whitehaven in the spring. Then they would go to Kinsale to the mackerel. After that they'd come back and they might follow the herrings at Peel, or they might go to the east coast of Scotland or to the Shetlands. And by the time the Lezayre men came back, they would take 2 or 3 months on the shore fishing off the shore of the cod, and then start the same round again the next year. The country had begun to become modernised. As far as I've heard from the old people, the old farmers and workmen and fishermen around the Lezayre district, people were dependent on their own resources for practically everything they had. They made their own clothing and they got all their food practically, and fire and light and everything else was all Manx. But at my time it had begun to get more modern. There was more imported stuff, and Manx language had begun to die out to a very considerable extent. The older people spoke it, of course, but the young people weren't interested. I've heard from old people that there was a good deal of downright poverty. There was Mrs. Gaughan, who lived and died at the dock. She was a Kinrade woman from the Down. She used to tell me that in the old times the people lived very hard when she was a girl. That's more than 100 years ago. I should think about 120 years ago. they had to rely on their own resources for everything, and if any sort of hard times came, there was a good deal of poverty. And they had to grow their own potatoes and even provide light. Sometimes I've heard her say that even in farmhouses, sometimes they wouldn't even have a candle. They would melt up a lot of grease and put a wick into it, and that would be the only light they would have for the evening. And the rushlight was used. I never saw but one rushlight. That was in Mr. Carroll's house in Ballatona, and I think they had it there more for a relic of the old times than for anything else, because they were well-to-do people. But they would sometimes light a rushlight for the sake of, I think it was for the sake of old times. So that shows that the old ways hadn't been forgotten at that time. Then there was the school at Lezayre. I went there for some years, but it had been modernised in my time. The best known schoolmaster at Lezayre that I can remember hearing about was old Mr. Hampton, the grandfather of Dr. Hampton in Douglas. And I think he was a man who was a good deal before his time. He kept a fairly good school, although I was never able to find out exactly how he was able to make a living out of it. He had quite a job with some of the boys, I've been told, and the girls, to get them to learn English. On one occasion he had John Parker, known as John of Power, from the Lezayre Bridge. He came and he had very little English. Mr. Hampton tried to teach him the alphabet in English, and he had quite a job with him. Eventually they got as far as the letter K. John didn't seem to be able to get the idea, and to help him out, Mr. Hampton sent him to get the key of the door. He asked John, "Well, John, what's this?" "When you're a Doris," John said, "the key of the door." Of course, as the people became, as they went away from home, say to the field, to fish, or to Ramsey, or to Clydeban, they would gradually pick up fairly good English, which they spoke with a very pronounced Manx accent. But still, their English was pretty good. An English farmer came over to farm Ballatharn, and he farmed it for some years. One of his neighbours, in conversation with him one day, said, "I don't like very much to be speaking with you, because my English is not very good. I've always been used to speaking in Manx." The Englishman said, "You've got twice better English than our people have got at home." So that shows that the English they did pick up was pretty good. I've always thought it was the sea rather than the land that brought most of the prosperity to the country people in outlying places. A great many of the people of the north who have got on well in business and professions have come from outlying districts, but it was because they went to sea. They came to be sea captains, some of them. And they went into, after they left the sea, some of them went into business and got on quite well. But I always thought that the sea had more to do with the prosperity of the north of the island than the land had, really. And the way of getting people to break out into other parts of the world and to emigrate. Because there wasn't much, there was no chance of any advancement to any great extent round about their own homes. I remember old Captain Carroll of Lezayre. He went to sea at an early age. He went to school in Liverpool. He picked up a knowledge of navigation, and he sailed to the Baltic and commanded a schooner for a greater part of his life, and after that settled down and began to farm in a small way. His family went right on and became quite considerable business people, and there were many like them. They went to sea and they began to prosper. Some of them came back, and quite a number of them came back when they got later on in life and took up farming to a certain extent, and some of them went on very well. But I couldn't think of anything at that time to compare with the conditions we have today. The whole outlook of the countryside was altogether different. And if people went back to those times now, they would find themselves in quite another world. Even in my time, 66 years ago or so, there's a vast change from that time to the present day. But it was a very interesting time. The people seemed to get on well, they lived quite happy, and they were fairly prosperous in their own way, those who had the means to be. But I think that there's a feeling among everybody at the present time that the advance of education and better conditions has been all to the good. And when I hear people speaking about going back to the old times, I never feel in sympathy with them, because I think that everything is very much better now than it ever was. In my young days, I used to hear a lot about the corn being cut with sickles. A whole crowd of men and women would go to the field to cut and tie, but I never saw that done. The earliest harvesting machine that I can remember was the old box reaper. They were made with the local smithies and joiner shops, very much after the style of the present day binder, with a big wheel about 3 feet high or so to take the weight of the machine, and a smaller wheel at the end of the bar, the knife being much like it is now. The board to catch the sheaf was very much like a barn door set on a long rod, and they swung it up and down with a foot pedal just like the more modern machine. Then the man on the box, there was a wooden box over the wheel, and the man on the box had a rake, and he collected the corn and made the sheaf and tipped up this sort of heavy board and left the sheaf behind. Then went on to the next, just like the more modern reaper. The knife was very much the same. In fact, I always thought the outstanding thing about these old reapers was the bucks. I worked with them myself, but there weren't many on the countryside in my time. But Mr. Alfred Kane, the late Mr. Alfred Kane of Mount Rule, was a blacksmith, and he told me that he served his time at Jockin's Smithy at Derby West when these reapers first came into use. He said that Jockin's made 3 or 4 the first year they took the work up, and the next year they made over a dozen. But later on, a lighter kind of machine came into use, with 2 wheels, one each side and another on the bar, so the old box reaper went out. And I'm told that it's hardly possible even to find one now that you could reconstruct to let people see what it's like. Mrs. Callow asked him, was there no meat at all going in the pot? Well, he said there might be a pig's foot or a pig's ear, but that would be all for the dinner for the family. I've heard from old people that there was a good deal of poverty in the country in the old days. They lived very rough, of course. There were times when they had plenty to eat, but in some of the places it wasn't always so. I've heard about the year of the potato famine. The potato crop failed, not so bad as it did in Ireland, but it was pretty bad all the same. I heard of an old man who was walking across the field on Kinrade where there had been potatoes. And he was picking up a few bits of bad ones they'd found on the field and eating them raw, just for the sake of having a potato. There was another story I heard about a mason who came to Ballatrona to work for old Mr. Callow. And when they were having dinner, he spoke about the poor meals people had round the countryside. Cabbage porridge, he called it, he got for dinner. Mrs. Callow asked him, didn't he have any meat at all in the pot? And he said, well, there might be a pig's foot or a pig's ear, but that'd be making dinner for the whole family. The crofters, of course, didn't have very much, but they seemed to be a cheerful lot of men. I've heard about old Dan Cleater, Cleater's croft on Ballakell. Dan and Cleater, they called him. He was a noted humorist. He always had something comical to say. He went one day to Ramsey, I was told, with his horse and cart. And while he was in Ramsey Quay, he took an argument with another man about their horses, how they could back the cart. They challenged one another to a match. Dan said that his horse would back the cart from Ramsey to Sobey Bridge. And when the other crofter heard that, he gave it up, he didn't take him on. Another thing I've heard about was a leaden farm. It was farmed in those days by Cleater brothers. I think they kept a warehouse in Ramsey and traded in corn and seeds. A man told me that he had been on Ballyledden in those days, and it was the smartest looking farm in the parish. The house and outbuildings and walls were well whitewashed, and everything was kept in good repair. And they had a peacock going about on the green, and it looked very smart in those days, more so than most places you would go to. Dan Kirby, the shoemaker, told me that when he was a boy, that's a long time ago because Mr. Kirby's been dead a good many years, he said that his father used to grow potatoes on the hollows and get the wing out near the shore. The hollows and the brews where there was gorse on the banks, and he used to take a spade and dig and grow potatoes any place he could get soil to dig. He was well used to all that district about the Len and Ballakell, got the wing. He used to speak about the crofters and other people who lived out there. Some of the houses have disappeared entirely now, but Dan knew them well. He mentioned particularly one day there was a funeral going from one of the crofts to Kirgander's churchyard. In those days they put the coffin into a cart and went along. And with the road being very rough, there was a good deal of jolts. And one of the men who was walking behind the cart noticed that the lid of the coffin had begun to lift. In those days there were no screws, they just fastened the lids on the coffins with nails. The old man called out in Manx to the driver to stop. Get a stone, he said, and tighten the nails as fast as you can. The lid comes off here, he'll be gone among the gorse and we'll never catch him. He was a noted humorist, more so than Jude Naw himself, one of his descendants, I've been told. There was another very interesting class of people that I don't quite remember. The men and women who walked on the houses, as people used to say, or in other words, they were itinerant beggars. There was a difference between those people and the people who went about with a petition. There was another class of people. Sometimes a farmer or a small farmer or a crofter more often would lose his cow perhaps, and he'd get some influential person in the parish to write a petition, and then he would go around from house to house to see if he could get a few shillings or a trifle here and there to replace the animal. But they weren't regular beggars, they were a different class. The last of the beggars, the real itinerant beggars that I can remember was John Kinnan, or Kane. He was known as Caney, John Caney from Balaff. But I think the most noted of all was Tom Quilliam, as far as I've heard. I never saw the man, but he was known as Tom Yenach. He was a native of Peel, and he travelled about the country before my time. He was alive in Peel in my younger days because I remember my uncle told me that he saw him in the house door in Peel. He very much disliked being called an Irishman. He said he was a true-born Manxman. And to get his temper up, the boys especially used to whistle and call Yenach. And he used to get into a terrible temper. I remember that when John Quayle the mason was building a new farmhouse in Ballakell, I was told that he was going past the place one day, and one of the masons up on the house whistled and called out, "Yeen you at tub, the Irish are on your tub." And he went back to the place and he took stones and cleared every man down up the scaffold. When he got badly provoked, he used to shout in Manx, "Cur thou spy in a kibagera, give me a hack or a garden spade, that'd be to take their heads off." There was another old chap I've heard about. Of course I never saw him, and I don't quite remember his name, but the boys used to provoke him too, and he would call for a bucket and a case knife. I never saw him. He was a native of Kirgander's. Of course, all those old fellows are gone. They were gone before my time. The only one I can remember was John Caney and a man from Puxdale they called Richard Quirk. He was known as Dick Tridley. I can remember at the Gorham house. In the old days they used to roof the houses with scars and thatch. They used to get the bent out of there, and the houses were generally built with clay mortar. I was greatly interested when I was a schoolboy to see John Quayle the mason use clay mortar, the only time I ever saw it used. They got timber put on, ready for the scars, and then Quayle got some clay mortar and went up and levelled the wall at the top. That's the only time I ever saw it used. Mrs. Charlie Juan was there when I was a schoolboy, lived in a cottage near the loch, at the Wing. It was an ordinary looking Manx cottage with 2 chimneys. Canon Quine said that he once visited the place and the cottage had 3 chimneys. He wrote an article in the Ramsey Church magazine about his visit. But I found afterwards that the canon must have made a mistake because the late Mr. George Cowan, the photographer, went there one time and photographed the house with Mrs. Tia sitting on a chair outside. And he showed me the picture and I noticed particularly that it was just an ordinary two-chimneyed cottage. Quite a lot of people went to that place to get herbs. I remember a neighbour where I live at present went to see about getting some herbs for a boy of hers who wasn't well. When she got to the house, Mrs. Tia told her to sit down. She couldn't do anything till the clock had gone round once. That meant that they had to wait till the hour had gone round, an hour had passed. As soon as the hour had passed, Mrs. Tia went and picked the herbs. I think it must have done some good because the boy she got them for is still alive and he's working every day, so I think he was no worse for it anyway. The sweeping of the road was practiced in that time too. I can remember it getting done. That was supposed to be a good cure for witchcraft and diseases. In fact, it was very common.